The ancient moon of Siren 7 held secrets in its silver dust, and Marcus Vale had made a career of stealing them. His boots left shallow prints in the crystalline sand as he approached the entrance to the ruins, thermal scanner painting heat signatures across his visor in shades of blue and ember. The archaeological survey had missed this chamber entirely, buried beneath centuries of meteor impacts and cosmic debris. It had taken him 3 months of careful excavation to reveal the sealed doorway. The stone threshold bore markings he didn't recognize, symbols that seemed to shift and writhe when he wasn't looking directly at them. His scanner recorded everything, but the readings made no sense. The symbols registered as both ancient and somehow fresh, as if they'd been carved moments ago rather than millennia past. Just another dead civilization's tomb, he muttered. Stepping across the threshold, the words echoed strangely in the chamber beyond, multiplying into whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The passage sloped downward, carved from the same silver-veined stone as the moon's surface. Emergency lights flickered on as he descended, their pale glow revealing murals that told a story he couldn't quite decipher. Figures danced across the walls, beautiful, otherworldly beings with flowing hair and eyes like captured starlight. But there was something wrong with the images. The longer he stared, the more the dancing figures seemed to be writhing, their expressions twisted in what might have been ecstasy or agony. The passage opened into a vast circular chamber, its domed ceiling lost in shadow. At the center, carved from a single piece of obsidian, stood a stone wall that rose 30 feet into the darkness, and chained to that wall, her arms stretched wide, hung a woman. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. She was beautiful in a way that made his chest ache, pale skin that seemed to glow with its own inner light, hair like spun silver cascading to her waist, features so perfect they might have been carved by the gods themselves. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold. They were the color of deep ocean water, endless and dark, and they held a sadness so profound it seemed to pull at his very soul. She was awake, watching him. "Please," she whispered, her voice carrying across the chamber like a prayer. "Don't come closer." But Marcus found his feet moving of their own accord, drawn by something deeper than curiosity. The chains that bound her were unlike anything he'd ever seen, not metal, but some kind of crystalline substance that pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light. Where they touched her skin, they left marks that glowed faintly, like brands that had never quite healed. "Who did this to you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion he didn't understand. She laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, but there was no humor in it. "I did this to myself," she said, "long ago, when I still believed in redemption." "That's impossible. These chains, they're not from any civilization I know. They're not from any civilization at all." Her eyes met his, and he saw galaxies spinning. In their depths, they're from something far older, something that exists in the spaces between stars. Marcus pulled a plasma cutter from his pack, its blue flame casting dancing shadows on the wall. "I can get you out of here." "No." The word cracked across the chamber like a whip. The chains flared brighter, and for a moment, Marcus could have sworn he saw something else in her eyes, something vast and terrible and hungry. "You don't understand. The chains aren't keeping me prisoner. They're keeping everyone else safe." But Marcus had stopped, listening to her words. He was lost in the melody of her voice, the way her lips moved as she spoke, the desperate beauty of her trapped form. Every instinct he'd developed in 20 years of tomb raiding screamed at him to run, but his heart had other plans. "What's your name?" he asked, kneeling beside the wall where one of the chains was anchored. She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, so softly he almost missed it, "Naya. I'm Marcus." He activated the cutter, its flame drawing a line of sparks across the crystalline chain. "And I'm getting you out of here, Marcus. Please." The first chain snapped with a sound like breaking glass, and the chamber shuddered. Dust rained from the ceiling, and somewhere in the darkness above, something groaned, a sound too deep and resonant to be mere stone settling. The remaining chains flared brighter, and Naya's body convulsed against the wall. "Stop," she gasped. But her voice was different now, layered, as if something else was speaking through her. "You don't know what you're doing." But Marcus was already cutting through the second chain, his movements quick and sure. He'd spent his life freeing treasures from their ancient prisons, and this was no different. This was just another rescue, another fortune to be claimed. The second chain fell away, and Naya's left arm dropped to her side. She whimpered, a sound so filled with pain and longing that it drove all rational thought from Marcus's mind. He could see the marks the chains had left on her skin, not burns, but something deeper. Patterns that looked almost like writing in a language that predated human civilization. Almost there, he murmured, moving to the third chain. Just hold on, Marcus. Her voice was barely a whisper now. When I'm free, when the last chain breaks, I won't be able to control what happens next. Promise me you'll run. He looked up at her, saw the tears streaming down her perfect cheeks, and felt his heart break. I'm not leaving you. Then you're a fool. But she smiled as she said it, and that smile was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. A brave, wonderful fool. The third chain shattered, and the chamber began to shake in earnest. Cracks appeared in the walls, spreading like spider webs, and that sound, that deep, resonant groaning, grew louder. The air itself seemed to thicken, taking on an almost oily quality that made his skin crawl. Only one chain remained, the one that bound her right ankle to the base of the wall. It was larger than the others, its crystalline surface carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. As Marcus approached it, he could feel something watching him, not Naya, but something else. Something that had been waiting in the darkness beyond the stars for exactly this moment. Last one, he said, raising the cutter. Marcus. Naya's voice was barely human now, harmonizing with itself in impossible ways. I love you. The words hit him like a physical blow. He'd known this woman for less than an hour, had spoken perhaps a dozen sentences to her, but somehow he knew she was telling the truth. More than that, he knew he loved her too. It was madness, but it was real. I love you too, he whispered, and brought the cutter down on the final chain. The crystal exploded in a shower of light and sound, and the chamber erupted into chaos. The walls began to bleed, not blood, but something dark and viscous that smelled of ozone and distant stars. The ceiling cracked open, revealing not the surface of the moon, but an endless void filled with writhing shapes that belonged in nightmares. And Naya began to change. The transformation began with her eyes. The deep ocean blue that had captured Marcus's heart darkened to black, then deeper still, until he was staring into twin wells of absolute void. Stars flickered in their depths, not reflected light, but actual burning suns wheeling through the darkness behind her pupils. Her pale skin took on an iridescent quality, shifting between silver and deep purple like the surface of an oil slick. Naya, Marcus whispered, backing away as the last fragments of the crystal chain dissolved into glittering dust. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she flexed her fingers, watching with fascination as tendrils of shadow coiled around her hands like living smoke. When she finally looked at him, her expression was one of profound sorrow mixed with something else, relief, perhaps, or resignation. I tried to warn you, she said, her voice now carrying harmonics that made the air itself vibrate. The chains weren't just holding me. They were holding it back. The chamber continued to shake, chunks of stone falling from the ceiling as the walls bled their dark substance. But Marcus found he couldn't look away from her, even transformed, even terrifying. She was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. The marks where the chains had touched her skin now glowed with soft bioluminescence, creating patterns that seemed to tell a story in a language older than words. What are you? He asked, though part of him already knew he wouldn't like the answer. Naya stepped away from the wall, her movements fluid as water. The shadows around her hands spread, crawling up her arms like living tattoos. I am what my people became when we reached too far into the dark between stars. I am the price of knowledge that mortals were never meant to possess. She moved toward him, and Marcus felt every instinct scream at him to run. But her eyes, those impossible, star-filled eyes, held such pain that he found himself rooted to the spot. My people were explorers once. We mapped the spaces between galaxies, dove into black holes to see what lay beyond, communed with entities that existed in dimensions we barely understood. We thought we were becoming gods. The shadow tendrils reached her shoulders now, and Marcus could see they weren't just darkness, they were alive, writhing with purpose, whispering in voices too soft to understand, but too urgent to ignore. Instead, we became something else, something hungry, something that couldn't stop consuming. But you're not like that, Marcus said, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. You're not a monster. Naya's laugh was like breaking glass. Aren't I? Do you know what I did to earn these chains? I devoured the light of 1,000 stars. I turned entire civilizations into shadow puppets dancing to my will. I loved a man once, long ago. And when he tried to leave me, I kept him with me for centuries, feeding on his terror and despair until there was nothing left but empty eyes and silent screams. The chamber gave another violent shudder, and Marcus realized the bleeding walls were actually dissolving, revealing the true nature of the space beyond. They weren't in a tomb on Siren 7 anymore, they were somewhere else entirely, suspended, in a pocket dimension where the laws of physics were more like gentle suggestions. The chains, he said, understanding beginning to dawn. They weren't just holding you. They were protecting everyone else. Now you begin to see. Naya had stopped, moving toward him, but the shadows hadn't. They pooled around her feet like liquid night, spreading across the floor in Marcus's direction. I've been imprisoned here for 3,000 years, Marcus. 3,000 years of fighting against what I am, holding back the hunger, trying to remember what it felt like to be human. Then why did you let me free you? Her smile was heartbreaking. Because I'm tired, so very tired of being strong. And because she reached out with one shadow-wreathed hand, stopping just short of touching his face. Because when I looked into your eyes, I remembered what love felt like. Not possession, not hunger, but actual love. And I was selfish enough to want to feel it again, even if it meant damning the universe. The shadows reached Marcus's boots, and he felt them testing, probing, searching for weakness. But instead of the violation he expected, there was something almost gentle about their touch. Like curious children exploring a new toy. Fight it, he said urgently. You fought it for 3,000 years. You can fight it now. I can't. Tears streamed down her face, each drop turning to liquid starlight as it fell. The chains weren't just physical, Marcus. They were psychic, spiritual. They held the darkness at bay by giving me something to focus on: pain, imprisonment, the dream of freedom. But now that I'm free, there's nothing left to hold onto except you. The shadows climbed higher, wrapping around his legs like affectionate serpents. Marcus felt a strange warmth spreading through his body, and with it came whispers, not words, but feelings. Naya's memories bleeding into his consciousness. He saw flashes of her past, a silver-skinned woman standing on the observation deck of a ship that sailed between stars, laughing as she pointed out constellations to a small child. The same woman, older now, her eyes wide with wonder as she touched something that shouldn't exist, something that existed in the spaces between thoughts. And then the hunger, the endless, consuming hunger that ate light and sound and hope itself. I can feel it starting, she whispered, her voice now coming from everywhere at once. The need to possess, to consume. It's been sleeping for so long, but now it's awake and it's so very hungry. Marcus looked at her, really looked at her. Not at the shadows or the starlight eyes or the impossible beauty, but at her. And he saw not a monster, but a woman who had been alone for 3 millennia, fighting a battle no one should have to fight. Then don't fight it alone, he said, and stepped forward into the shadows. The darkness enveloped him like warm water, and for a moment he felt what she felt, the incredible, terrifying hunger that gnawed at the edges of her consciousness like a living thing. But he also felt something else, her love for him, pure and desperate and real. It was the only clean thing in the writhing mass of shadow and starlight. That had become her existence. Marcus, no, she gasped, but her arms were already around him, pulling him closer. You don't understand. If I lose control, if I give in to what I am, I'll consume you first. I'll eat your light, your warmth, your very soul, and I'll enjoy every moment of it. Then don't give in, he said simply, his hands finding her face in the darkness. Her skin was fever hot and cold, as space at the same time, but it was still her skin. Hold on to me instead. The shadows around them pulsed, and Marcus felt something vast and ancient turn its attention toward them. The hunger was enormous, a force of nature that had devoured galaxies. But it was also oddly fragile. It needed her cooperation, her surrender, and she hadn't given it. "I don't know how," she whispered against his neck. "I've been holding it back for so long, but I don't know how to make it stop." Marcus pulled back to look at her and saw that her eyes were no longer entirely black. Flecks of blue were fighting their way to the surface, like islands of humanity in an ocean of void. "Then we'll figure it out together," he said, "one day at a time." For the first time since the chains had broken, Naya smiled with something approaching hope. The shadows around them quieted, still present, but no longer quite so eager. "You're insane," she said. "Probably." Marcus kissed her forehead, tasting starlight and ozone. "But I'm not going anywhere." The chamber or whatever this place had become stabilized around them. The bleeding walls sealed themselves, the falling debris stopped, and the void beyond grew quiet. It wasn't over, Marcus knew. The hunger was still there, waiting, and sooner or later they would have to face it properly. But for now, in this moment, they had each other, and sometimes that was enough to hold back the dark. The old man appeared without warning, stepping through what had been solid stone as if it were morning mist. Marcus spun toward the sound of footsteps, pulling Naya protectively behind him. But the stranger raised both hands in a gesture of peace. He was ancient, not just old, but ancient in a way that suggested he'd seen the birth and death of stars. His white hair fell to his shoulders, and his eyes held the peculiar depth that came from witnessing too much history. "Peace, young treasure hunter," the old man said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "I am Jorah Thorn, and I've been waiting for this moment for longer than you can imagine." "How did you?" Marcus began, but Jorah waved the question away. "How did I find you? How did I pass through walls that exist in 17 different dimensions simultaneously? How did I know you would be here?" Jorah's smile was sad but not unkind. "The same way I know that the woman you freed is not what she appears to be, and that you have approximately 6 hours before the psychic resonance from her awakening draws every shadow hunter in 3 galaxies to this location." Naya stepped forward, the shadows around her recoiling slightly in Jorah's presence. "You know what I am. I know what you were. I know what you became. And I know what you're trying very hard not to become again." Jorah pulled a small device from his robe, something that looked like a cross between a compass and a music box. It hummed softly, its surface covered in symbols that shifted and changed as Marcus watched. "I also know that love alone won't be enough to hold back what's inside you, child." "Then what will?" Marcus demanded. Jorah studied him for a long moment, and Marcus felt as if he were being weighed and measured by those ancient eyes. "Understanding," he said finally. "The chains that held her were forged from crystallized regret and powered by the weight of her own guilt. But guilt is a finite resource, and after 3,000 years, even the deepest shame begins to fade. What she needs now is truth." The old man gestured, and the air in front of them shimmered, forming images that hung in the space between heartbeats. Marcus saw Naya's people as they had been, tall, graceful beings with silver skin and eyes like captured starlight. They stood on the decks of ships that sailed between dimensions, their faces turned toward wonders that existed in the spaces between thoughts. The veil touched. Jorah said softly, "They were the first to map the deep dark, the first to commune with entities that existed before time began. They thought they were becoming gods, but they were really becoming something far more dangerous. They were becoming necessary." The images shifted, showing the veil touch diving deeper into realms where physics was optional and sanity was a luxury. They touched things that shouldn't exist, learned secrets that were meant to remain hidden, and with each revelation, they changed. Their silver skin took on an iridescent quality. Their eyes darkened to wells of absolute void, and their hunger there, terrible, endless hunger, began to grow. "The entities in the deep dark don't create," Jorah continued. "They consume. They corrupt. They turn exploration into possession, curiosity into hunger, love into obsession. The veil touch became their agents in our reality, spreading the infection of the void wherever they went." Marcus felt Naya's hand tighten in his. As the images showed the aftermath, entire civilizations reduced to shadow puppets, stars going dark as their light was devoured, reality itself beginning to fray at the edges where the veil touched had passed. But some of them fought back, Jorah said, and his voice carried a note of profound respect. A few, like our dear Nia here, managed to hold onto enough of their humanity to resist the hunger. They chained themselves, imprisoned themselves, sacrificed their freedom to protect the universe from what they had become. If they were so dangerous, Marcus said, why not just kill them? Because they couldn't be killed. Jorah's expression was grim. The transformation made them something beyond mortality. Death would only have released them into the void, where they could return stronger and hungrier than before. The chains were the only solution, not just physical restraints, but psychological ones. They held the darkness at bay by giving the veil-touched something to focus on besides their hunger. The images faded, leaving them in the dim light of the chamber. Nia was very still, her eyes fixed on the floor. You make it sound noble, she said quietly, but I remember what I did before the chains. I remember the taste of fear, the sweetness of despair. I remember enjoying it. And that's what makes you different from the others, Jorah said gently. You remember. You feel guilt. You're still fighting, even now, even free. Most of your people gave in completely within decades of their transformation. You held out for 3 millennia. But I can't hold out forever, Nia whispered. I can feel it growing stronger. The hunger, the need to possess and consume. It's like a tide. And I'm running out of shore. Jorah nodded sadly. Which is why I'm here. The chains are broken, and they can't be reforged. But there might be another way. He pulled something else from his robes, a small crystal vial filled with liquid that moved like trapped starlight. This is the distilled essence of a dying star, not its light, but its sacrifice. Stars die so that new ones can be born, giving up their own existence to seed the universe with the materials needed for life. It's the opposite of the void's hunger. What are you suggesting? Marcus asked. Though he was beginning to suspect he knew. The only way to permanently stop the hunger is to replace it with something else. Something equally powerful but fundamentally different. Self-sacrifice instead of consumption. Love instead of possession. Death instead of endless feeding. No. Marcus stepped between Jorah and Nia. There has to be another way. There is, Jorah said quietly. But it requires a different kind of sacrifice. One that you might not be willing to make. The old man looked at Marcus with those ancient eyes. The hunger inside her can be contained, but only by someone who understands it completely, someone who has felt it, tasted it, and chosen to reject it. Someone who can anchor her to humanity not through love alone, but through shared experience. Marcus, no, Nia said, understanding immediately. You can't mean the transformation is irreversible. Jorah continued, but it doesn't have to be damning. If you choose to take on part of her burden, to share the hunger and the guilt and the eternal struggle, then together you might be strong enough to hold it back. Marcus looked at Nia, seeing the terror in her star-filled eyes, not terror of the hunger, but terror of what he might choose. What exactly are you offering? A bond. Jorah said, psychic, spiritual, eternal. You would become partially veil-touched yourself, not enough to be consumed by the hunger, but enough to understand it, to help her fight it, to share the burden so that neither of you has to carry it alone. And if we refuse, Jorah's smile was infinitely sad. Then in 6 hours, the shadow hunters will arrive. They'll try to rechain her, and when that fails, they'll try to kill you both. And eventually, when the hunger becomes too strong, she'll consume you anyway. This way, at least, you have a choice. The chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of Jorah's device. Marcus felt the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders like a cloak, made of lead. He thought of his old life, the solitary existence of a treasure hunter, the thrill of discovery, the simple pleasure of a job well done. All of that would be gone, replaced by an eternity of fighting against forces that existed beyond human comprehension. But then he looked at Nia, saw the desperate hope and love in her eyes, and realized the choice had already been made. It had been made the moment he'd first seen her chained to that wall. What do I have to do? He asked. Jorah held out the vial of starlight. Drink half, give her the rest, and prepare for the most difficult conversation of your lives. Marcus took the vial, feeling the liquid inside pulse with dying radiance. What conversation? The one with her sister, Jorah said quietly. She's the reason the shadow hunters are coming. And she's not nearly as reformed as our dear Naya here." The starlight burned as it went down, filling Marcus's veins with liquid fire and cosmic radiation. He felt his consciousness expand, touching the edges of something vast and hungry and utterly alien. For a moment, he was no longer Marcus Vale, treasure hunter and wanderer. He was something that existed in the spaces between stars, feeding on the terror of civilizations, drunk on the sweetness of consumed light. Then Naya's hand touched his, and the sensation grounded him. He was still, human, still himself, but now he could feel her burden as if it were his own. The hunger was there, coiled in the depths of his mind like a serpent made of void. But it was manageable, contained, shared. "I can feel it," he whispered, wonder and horror warring in his voice. "How did you stand it alone for so long?" "I didn't have a choice," Naya said, drinking the remaining starlight. For a moment, her features solidified, becoming more human, more real. The shadows around her quieted, and her eyes flickered back to their original ocean blue. "And I wasn't entirely alone. The chains helped, gave me something to focus on besides the hunger." But now she was interrupted by a sound that made the chamber's walls tremble, the scream of reality. Being torn like fabric, a rift opened in the air above, them edges crackling with energy that hurt to look at directly. Through it stepped a figure that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. If Naya was beautiful, then her sister was devastating, taller, more regal, with silver skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Her hair moved like liquid, mercury, and her eyes were wells of absolute darkness that made the void between stars look bright by comparison. She wore the hunger like other people wore clothes, naturally, comfortably, without shame or restraint. "Hello, little sister," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made Marcus's bones ache. "I felt your chains break. I felt your awakening. Did you really think you could hide from me, Celeste?" Naya stepped forward, placing herself between Marcus and the newcomer. "I was hoping you wouldn't come. Hope is such a mortal emotion," Celeste said, gliding down from the rift to stand on the chamber floor. Where her feet touched, the stone began to wither and crack. "I've been searching for you for 3,000 years, dear sister. Did you think I would give up now when you're finally free?" Jorah raised his device, and it began to hum more loudly. Celeste of the Veil touched. "I bind you by the ancient laws to parley and discourse. You may not harm or consume while the beacon sounds." Celeste laughed, a sound like breaking glass and dying stars. "The old laws, how quaint. Very well, keeper of dead traditions. I will honor the parley, but know that it won't last forever." She turned her attention to Marcus, and he felt her gaze like ice water in his veins. "So this is the little mortal who freed my sister. How deliciously predictable. They always choose the broken ones, don't they? The ones who think they can be saved." "I wasn't broken," Marcus said, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. "I was just looking for something worth finding." "And what did you find?" Celeste circled him like a predator, her presence making the air itself feel heavy and oppressive. "A monster in chains, a creature that has devoured the light of 1,000 stars, a being so dangerous that she had to imprison herself to keep from consuming everything she touched." "I found someone who was strong enough to chain herself," Marcus replied. "Someone who chose to sacrifice her freedom to protect others. Someone who fought against her nature for 3 millennia rather than give in to it." "How romantic." Celeste's smile was sharp as a blade. "But tell me, little mortal, what do you plan to do when the hunger becomes too strong, when your shared burden isn't enough to hold it back? When she wakes up one night and realizes that she's tired of resisting, tired of the constant struggle, tired of being noble and self-sacrificing and oh so good?" "That won't happen," Naya said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Won't it?" Celeste gestured, and the air shimmered with images, not the past this time, but possible futures. Marcus saw himself and Naya living in isolation, fighting the hunger day by day. He saw the strain wearing on them both, saw the moments of weakness, the gradual erosion of their humanity. He saw Naya's eyes growing darker, her smile becoming more predatory, her touch leaving marks that didn't heal. "I've seen this story before," Celeste continued. "The monster falls in love with the hero, promises to be good, swears that love will conquer all, and for a while, it works. But the hunger is eternal, and love is not. Love fades, grows stale, becomes routine. But the hunger only grows stronger. Then what do you suggest? Marcus asked through gritted teeth. I suggest you stop fighting what you are and embrace what you could become. Celeste's eyes flared with dark fire. I suggest you join me in finishing what our people started. We could remake the universe, little mortal. We could feed the void until it's strong enough to devour reality itself and birth something new. Something perfect, something without the messy complications of free will and moral choice. You're talking about genocide on a cosmic scale, Jorah said quietly. I'm talking about evolution. Celeste corrected. The universe is sick, keeper, infected with chaos and chance and the terrible burden of consciousness. We could cure it. We could make it clean and quiet and eternally peaceful. By killing everything that lives. By making everything that lives part of something greater. Celeste turned back to Marcus, and her expression was almost pleading. You've tasted the hunger now. You know what it's like to feel truly alive. To be part of something infinite and eternal. Why would you want to go back to your small, mortal existence? Why would you want to condemn my sister to an eternity of struggle when she could have peace? For a moment, Marcus was tempted. The hunger whispered in his mind, painting pictures of what they could accomplish together, the worlds they could devour, the civilizations they could absorb, the terrible and beautiful unity they could create. It would be so easy to give in, to let the darkness take them both. But then he felt Naya's hand in his, felt her love and her fear and her desperate hope. And he remembered what he'd learned in the past few hours. Love wasn't about possession or consumption. It was about choice, the choice to keep fighting, to keep hoping, to keep believing that something better was possible. No, he said simply. Celeste's eyes widened in genuine surprise. No to genocide. No to cosmic evolution. No to the easy path. Marcus squeezed Naya's hand. We'll find another way. There's no other way, Celeste said, and for the first time, her voice carried a note of real pain. I've searched for 3,000 years, little mortal. I've explored every possibility, every potential solution. The hunger can only be fed or denied, and denial is a losing game. Eventually, we all give in. You gave in, Naya said quietly. I didn't. You haven't yet. Celeste corrected. But you will, and when you do, when you finally stop fighting and embrace what you truly are, you'll understand that everything I've done has been for you, to prepare a universe worthy of your awakening. The parley beacon in Jorah's hands began to flicker, its light growing dimmer. The binding is weakening, he warned. You need to make your choice soon. Celeste smiled, and the temperature in the chamber dropped by 20 degrees. Yes, little sister, choose. Come with me willingly, and I'll make sure your precious mortal dies quickly. Refuse, and I'll keep him alive for centuries, feeding on his screams, using his suffering to teach you the true meaning of hunger. Marcus felt Naya's hand tremble in his, felt her love and her terror and her desperate indecision. The hunger whispered in both their minds, painting pictures of surrender, of the peace that would come from giving in to their nature. But Marcus had made his choice the moment he'd first seen her chained to that wall, and he would make it again and again, for as long as it took. We choose each other, he said, his voice carrying across the chamber like a prayer. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Celeste's smile faded, replaced by something that might have been sadness. Then you choose poorly, she said, and when the hunger finally takes you both, remember that I offered you a kinder fate. The parley beacon flickered one last time and died, and Celeste's form began to dissolve back into shadow. I'll be watching, little sister, and when you're ready to stop playing at being human, you'll know where to find me. She vanished, leaving only the faint scent of ozone and the echo of her laughter. But Marcus barely noticed. He was looking at Naya, seeing the fear and hope and love in her eyes, and he knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The real test was just beginning. 3 months later, Marcus understood what Celeste had meant about the hunger growing stronger. It wasn't just the physical craving anymore, that gnawing emptiness in his chest that could only be filled by consuming light and energy and the life force of others. It was the way the hunger changed his thoughts, made him see people not as individuals but as potential meals, made him calculate the terror-to-sustenance ratio of entire civilizations. He and Naya had found refuge on a dead world at the edge of the galaxy, far from populated systems, far from temptation. They'd built a simple shelter from the bones of an ancient city, and there they practiced the discipline Jorah had taught them, meditation techniques designed to quiet the hunger, breathing exercises that helped them remember their humanity, rituals of self-denial that grew harder each day. I dreamed about Celeste again, Naya said one morning, her voice hollow with exhaustion. The shadows under her eyes had deepened, and her silver skin had taken on an unhealthy pallor. She was showing me Earth, all those billions of minds, all that delicious fear and hope and love. She said it would be so easy to just take a small taste. Marcus pulled her closer, feeling the hunger stir in his own chest at the thought. Just a dream, was it? Naya's star-filled eyes met his. Or was it a vision, a prophecy, a promise of what we'll eventually become? They'd been having this conversation more often lately, these moments when the weight of their burden felt too heavy to bear. Marcus had noticed that Naya's control was slipping. Shadows followed her everywhere now. And sometimes, when she smiled, he could see too many teeth. Jorah's coming today, he said. Changing the subject, maybe he'll have news about the containment protocols. But when the old man arrived, stepping through his dimensional gate with the practiced ease of centuries, his expression was grim. The protocols are failing, he said without preamble. The other veil touched our awakening. Celeste has been busy, breaking chains, freeing her people. She's building an army. How many? Marcus asked. 17 so far, and each one that awakens makes the others stronger. They're feeding off each other's hunger, amplifying it, turning it into something that could devour galaxies. Jorah's ancient eyes were heavy with sorrow. I'm afraid the time for half measures has passed. What are you saying? Naya asked, though her voice suggested she already knew. I'm saying that love isn't enough anymore. The burden you're sharing, the discipline you're practicing, the hope you're clinging to, it's not working. The hunger is winning, and when it finally takes you, there'll be 18 veil touched instead of 17. The universe can't survive those odds. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. You want us to die? I want you to choose, Jorah said quietly. Death, or transformation into something that could actually make a difference. There's a ritual, ancient and terrible, that could channel your hunger into something productive. Instead of consuming life, you could consume the void itself. Instead of spreading darkness, you could devour it. That's impossible, Naya said. The void is infinite. It can't be consumed, not by one person, no, but by the people who love each other enough to become something new, something that exists in the spaces between consumption and creation. Jorah pulled out a scroll covered in symbols that hurt to look at. The ritual would bind you together permanently, not just psychically, but on a fundamental level. You'd become a single entity with two bodies, two minds working in perfect harmony, and together, you'd be strong, enough to hunt the others of your kind. Marcus stared at the scroll, feeling the hunger whisper its approval. The idea of becoming something larger, something more than human, appealed to the darkness in his mind, but it also terrified him. What's the catch? The catch is that you'd cease to be human entirely. The Marcus Vale who hunted treasure and dreamed of simple pleasures would be gone. The Naya who fought against her nature and chose love over hunger would be gone. What remained would be something new, something necessary, but no longer truly alive in any sense you'd recognize. And if we refuse, then I kill you both myself, Jorah said simply. It would be kinder than letting the hunger take you, kinder than letting you become what Celeste wants you to become. The chamber fell silent except for the whisper of wind. Through the ruins outside, Marcus felt Naya's hand in his, felt her love and her terror and her desperate hope, and knew that she was feeling the same things from him. They'd come so far together, fought so hard to hold onto their humanity, and now they were being asked to give it up voluntarily. There's another option, Naya said quietly. We could run, find some dead corner of the universe, chain ourselves. Again, hope that the hunger doesn't grow too strong before we find a better solution. Hope is a luxury we can't afford, Jorah said. Your sister won't give you the time. She's already tracking your psychic signature, already sending scouts to find you. In a few days, maybe a week at most, she'll be here with her army, and when she arrives, you'll have to choose between joining her or dying fighting her. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. The hunger whispered in his mind, painting pictures of what they could become, a force of nature, a cosmic predator, something that could reshape reality itself. But underneath the whispers, he could hear something else, Naya's voice, soft and loving, reminding him of what they'd already chosen. "We choose each other," he said finally, opening his eyes to meet Jorah's ancient gaze. "Whatever that means, whatever we become, even if it means giving up everything that makes you human. We gave that up the moment we chose to share the burden," Naya said. "We've been becoming something else ever since, at least this way. We become something that can help." Jorah nodded sadly. "Then we begin at sunset. The ritual requires starlight and the alignment of certain cosmic forces. Are you prepared for what comes next?" Marcus looked at Naya, seeing his own fear and determination reflected in her star-filled eyes. "Will it hurt?" "Yes," Jorah said, honestly, but not as much as living with the alternative. As the sun set over the dead world, casting long shadows across the ruins of the ancient city, Marcus and Naya stood at the center of a circle carved with symbols that predated human civilization. The scroll lay open between them, its words shifting and changing as they read, reality bending around the concepts described in its ancient text. "Are you ready?" Jorah asked, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. Marcus felt the hunger stir in his chest, eager for what was to come. But underneath it, stronger than it, was his love for the woman standing across from him. She'd been alone for 3,000 years, fighting a battle no one should have to fight. Now she wouldn't have to fight it alone. "I'm ready," he said, and meant it. The ritual began with fire, not normal fire, but flames that burned cold and bright, consuming not wood or flesh but the very concept of separation. Marcus felt his consciousness expand, touching Naya's mind, feeling her thoughts and memories and fears as if they were his own. The hunger was there, enormous and demanding, but it was no longer a burden to be carried alone. Together, they were strong enough to reshape it. Together, they were strong enough to turn consumption into creation, hunger into purpose, darkness into something that could hunt the shadows themselves. The transformation was agony and ecstasy combined, every atom of their being rewritten, every thought and feeling and dream rewoven into something new. Marcus felt himself dissolving and reforming, becoming something that existed in the spaces between stars, something that could touch the void itself and make it scream when it was over. They stood in the circle as they had before, but they were no longer separate beings. They were one entity with two bodies, two minds working in perfect harmony, sharing thoughts and feelings and purpose. The hunger was still there, but it was different now, focused, controlled, aimed at targets that deserved to be consumed. "How do you feel?" Jorah asked. Marcus, Naya turned to look at him with eyes that held the light of dying stars. When they spoke, their voices harmonized perfectly, creating words that resonated in dimensions beyond the physical. "We feel ready," they said, "ready to hunt." Above them, the stars watched in silence as something new was born, not human, not veil-touched, but something that existed in the spaces between, something that could stand against the darkness and make it answer for its crimes. And in the deep void between galaxies, Celeste felt their awakening and smiled. The game was about to begin in earnest.